right, so we're back, and looks like we're pretty much all here. All right, so what we need to do today is we're not quite done with our discussion about unemployment and the labor force. When that's done, then what comes after that is our discussion of inflation. Okay, now inflation is another extremely important topic in macroeconomics. And I actually found some extremely interesting videos for our discussion about inflation. And not just inflation, but another topic, which is called bubbles. We'll see what that is when we get to it. But right now, we're going to wrap up our discussion about unemployment. And then we will be able to start our discussion about inflation. And at the end, we'll look at what bubbles are and what they mean. So let's see. Let me go. I'm missing something here. Hold on. Here it is. Okay, I got it. All right. So, all right, let's get back to now. I think where we left off was we were going to look at some of the alternative definitions of unemployment that the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Now, I did mention, I believe, that there are 6 of them. And so the formal definitions, let's see, are right here. And of course, what happens is each one has progressively more people in it that are officially counted as unemployed. And so what happens is the numbers can be very, very different from each other. Why don't we quickly go back to the BLS's own website for a second. And what we're going to look for here is unemployment. Let's see. I'll see if I can find it this way. There should be a discussion here of the different measures you want. No, I think this is it. Let's see. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff here. There's national employment, and that's fine. And you can see what's nice about this one is that we're seeing how unemployment is broken down into these different sectors of the economy. And so, for example, we have non-farming, which is the total non-farming. They break up unemployment into farming and non-farming. I guess the logic being is that farming is a very different type of industry than all the rest of them. So they feel like we'll keep that as a separate category. So all these other sectors are all what they call non-farm employment. And then they would have a separate category for farming. But you can see we have goods producing, mining and logging, manufacturing, retail, utilities, financial, education, health services, and then everything else. So this is how they break up their unemployment numbers into sectors. And then, of course, they have all these numbers telling us where those numbers have been. What other good stuff do they have here? Well, let's see. Other things that might be interesting to us. How about, yeah, see, there's so much stuff here. It's hard to be sure what all these things are. I mean, we have employment by occupation. Well, I don't know what that is. What else could we find that might be interesting? We have geographic information where they do actually break up the unemployment rate by sectors of or segments of the country. Like, I guess we could look at this area. And so, yeah, the numbers are broken down by regions of the country as well as by different sectors of the employment market. But what I was really hoping to find is a breakdown by the different unemployment definitions, mainly U1 through U6. So I don't know. Well, we have popular series, but I don't know. Now we're going to need, by the way, when we start talking about inflation, All the tables that we'll need are also on the same website. The BLS is responsible for measuring both unemployment and inflation. So we'll continue to come back to this website for a while at least. After that, we'll switch to other government agencies which collect data. But yeah, I'm not seeing any place. Let me try something here. Definitions of unemployment. Oh, well, this is basically where they tell us how they decide who and Fred is put out by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. BLS is a government agency. It's part of the Department of Commerce. So that's the main difference. The Fed is an independent, which we'll see throughout the end of the course. The Fed is the central bank of the United States, and it is officially independent of the government, and it has its own data sources as well. So the Fed is coming from the Fed, specifically the St. Louis Fed, and BLS is coming from the U.S. Department of Commerce. Okay, they're both good sources of data. Okay, so if you need data, either one of those will do the job. But if you go to Fred, you can get a lot of nice graphs. Like if you look at Fred and say, okay, Fred, tell me U.S. unemployment. It'll have it. Don't worry, it's there somewhere. Now, this is what we were calling U3 the other day. This is the quote official unemployment rate. And you can see they break it down for us. It's a nice long time series chart. And you can see it goes through cycles. And in fact, if you notice, these gray bars are recessions. Okay, they always do it this way. And you can see once a recession starts, fairly soon afterwards, the unemployment rate rises to very high levels, and then it starts to come back down again. And now here, this is different. Look how this big spike is. I think we know what caused that. Yeah, that's COVID, all right. Prior to that, look how low unemployment was getting. It had dropped down to 3.5%, which was a record, by the way. And all of a sudden, boom, we're back up here around, pretty high levels, like double digits, which you can see the last time we had that kind of unemployment was during the Depression. But of course, it was caused by an extremely unusual event. It really had nothing to do with the US economy itself. It was this catastrophic external event that caused us to have such high unemployment. But now that things are starting to get back to normal a little bit, you can see so is the unemployment rate. It's not all the way back yet, but it's getting there. I don't think that's the problem there. I think the drop off is largely because there was a lot of lockdowns going on. A lot of jobs were forcibly closed. And once they were allowed to open up again, people started being able to work. And although it is possible that some people dropped out of the labor force, that always happens when the economy is going through a rough period. But this time, I don't think that's the main reason why it's dropping so much. I think it's a lot of the people simply went back to work. Not in all parts of the country, of course. As we're seeing now, there's some states that are starting to say, listen, we're going back to normal. And others are saying, no, we're staying in lockdown. Like California is really rigidly locked down, but Texas is now saying, you know what, that's it. We've had enough. We're going back to normal. So every part of the country is different now. But in general, the unemployment rate is falling off because a lot of these businesses are starting to reopen. I guess the idea is that because there's a vaccine now, it's much safer than it was before, and we can go ahead and start opening up. Because, I mean, we can't wait till, everybody's got the vaccine, or at least we can't wait till there's zero risk, because that will never happen. So we're starting to see it happening, and right about here, we're looking at about 6.7%, which is not bad, but it's still not where we were, which is last year at this time, we were all the way down to 3.5%, which is pretty fantastic. Now they have other stuff in here too. If you want to really get a good look at all the different data that they have, it's a very impressive list. All kinds of good details are in here. In fact, we'll probably be continuously looking at them throughout the course. And if you want to, You can also download this into an Excel spreadsheet. It's nice to have the graphs, but it's also nice to have the actual data. And they have a lot of interesting things in here that you won't find somewhere else. So now the interesting thing is most countries, the government has a single statistical agency which gathers up all the information on all the different economic variables. The US always has to be different for whatever reason. So you've got different agencies gathering up different pieces of information, as well as the central bank. So you're going to have to search a little bit to find what you're looking for. All right, so yeah, so Fred is an excellent source for data. And you can see they have their own consumer price index measures, that's inflation. They have all kinds of good stuff. They have exchange rates, the unemployment rate, as we just looked at, the size of the payrolls. That's how many people are working in jobs other than farming. So in other words, if you're not interested, if you're more interested in how many people are actually working, the total number right here on non-farm payrolls is 142,631,000. Okay, so that's all the people who have jobs that are not in the farming industry. The reason, I guess the reason for stripping off farming is because they feel that it reacts very differently to economic variables than the rest of these jobs. In particular, farming is obviously a very seasonal business. And so they feel that keeping it included with the others might give us a distorted view of how much unemployment there really is in the economy. So this is, but you notice it was just up, 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 up. There's a little bit of a dip here, and then it was heading straight up, and then pow. Well, I think we know what happened here. So, and yes, if you want this data downloaded into a spreadsheet, it's right there. Look how easy that is. And it comes out over here, and before you know it, you've got all the data you could possibly ask for. All right. All right, so what else do we want to look at? Let's go back to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They have all these articles here. If you want to know more about how the data are calculated, like for example, they'll explain you here who is counted as employed. So we've already started to discuss this. People are considered to be employed if they did any work at all for pay or profit during the survey reference week. This means all part-time and temporary work, as well as regular full-time year-round employment. Individuals are counted as employed if they have a job at which they did not work during the survey week, or they were not paid, or whether they were paid or not because they were on vacation, they were sick, having childcare problems, etc. So in other words, if this caused you not to show up for work last week, you're still counted as employed because these are obviously very temporary measures. All right, and so then unemployed. In order to be counted as unemployed, you have to obviously not have a job. You must have actively looked for work in the last 4 weeks, and you must be available for work. And then they formally go ahead and sort of give you a better feel for what does it actually mean to be looking for a job. And you see all of this stuff here: submitting resumes, answering job ads, checking union listings, et cetera, et cetera. Now, passive methods of job search do not have the potential to connect job seekers with potential employers and therefore do not qualify as active job search methods. Okay, so that means those people are not counted as part of the workforce. Okay, so in other words, if you don't have a job, they don't count you as unemployed, then you are now no longer part of the workforce. So, if you want to look at these in more detail, all this information is right here. And let's see, what do the unemployment measures figures measure? Yeah, I'm still having a problem finding those 6 measures. They should have the formal definitions hiding in here somewhere. I don't see why they make it so hard to find them. Search CPS. All right, look, I'm going to go for U1 and see what comes up. Oh boy. Let's try, maybe it's because it's U-1. No, you see what I mean? Oh, maybe this is it. Man, I'm telling you, sometimes, finding this stuff is just like pulling teeth. It really is. All right. Well, I don't want to waste all your time looking for this. Clearly, they've stuck it somewhere where it's not in an obvious place. Um, you know, I don't know where to find it, but they should, somewhere on this website, they have the formal definitions for U1 through 6. Now, fortunately, I have these in my slides, so we can take a quick look at these. Um, so alternative measures of unemployment, essentially what they're doing here is they're taking a closer look at these people who are not working, and they're slowly adding them back to the unemployment rolls. And so, in other words, people who are, for example, discouraged, marginally attached, or part-time, with U3, they may not be counted as unemployed, but they will be counted in U4, 5, and 6. So a discouraged worker is officially somebody who does not have a job, would like to have one, but has not looked for work in the last 4 weeks. On the other hand, they should have looked within the last 12 months. So between 4 weeks and 12 months, if that's how long it's been since you looked for work, you're not considered to be unemployed, and you're also not considered to be in the labor force, but you are counted as a, quote, discouraged worker, which means you may be included in one of the other measures like U4, 5, or 6. Marginally attached means that you are discouraged, plus those who have given other reasons besides a lack of jobs for their failure to seek work. Okay, so if you just haven't given up, but there's something else that stops you from looking for work, you could be considered to be marginally attached. Like, for example, people who work part-time. We have people who work less than 35 hours and they want to work full-time, but they can't find full-time jobs. So those are considered to be involuntarily part-time or part-time for economic reasons. Those are being counted, if you notice, as being full-time employees or employed by U3. So what do we do differently in these other measures? So U3, of course, as we've already seen, is the number who are unemployed divided by the total labor force. And right about now, as we saw, it was around 6.7%. And but that was much lower a year ago. But thanks to COVID, it spiked up to over 14% and now has settled back down to about 6.7%. The measure of unemployment, U4, okay, here we go. So we've added to both the numerator and the denominator discouraged workers. And this will have the effect of making this number larger than U3. Okay, so this is one of the reasons why some economists prefer these other measures. They feel that U3 is unnecessarily narrowly defined and that a lot of people who are unemployed are not being counted by U3. But so these other alternative measures do exist because they do count other types of people who did not officially count in U3. Now, U5, we're adding discouraged workers and other marginally attached workers. So you can see what we're essentially doing here is broadening up the definition of unemployment compared to U3. And finally, U6 basically includes everyone. Everyone. That's correct. That's correct. Exactly. So the more people we include in these definitions, the higher the unemployment rate will be. All right, now we're adding them to the numerator and the denominator, and the net effect is that the more people we count as unemployed, the higher the rate will be. All right, so U6 is the broadest measure. If you don't fall into this one, if you don't count in U6, that means you're really not trying. Okay, that would be George Costanza territory. Okay, you're really and truly hoping not to get a job if you're not in any of these categories. All right, so this is as high as it goes. And so usually often U6 can be roughly double the level of U3 because it includes so many other people who are sort of in a gray area between being employed and unemployed. All right, but we also have U1 and U2. These are really hard to qualify for. For example, to be unemployed, you have to be unemployed for at least 15 weeks, okay, to get into U1. It's like a very exclusive club here. And then U2 means we have total who lost their jobs plus total who completed temporary jobs over the labor force. Okay, so U2, 1 and U2 are usually lower than U3. And so this is like the last data that I was able to get my hands on. This is what the numbers look like in the first quarter of 2000, about 3 years ago. And of course, this is the one that's referred to in the media as the quote official unemployment rate. But you can see the others are quite a bit higher or lower as the case may be. U6, the very broad measure, is double roughly U3. Man, look at U1. That's really small. But that's because they're trying to only include as unemployed people who are like, wow, really, really unemployed. It's a tough thing to get into that category. Now, economists will take these numbers and say, listen, we need to make a distinction between different types of unemployment. In other words, we're not all unemployed for the same reasons. So they break it down into 3 basic categories. So we will define all unemployment to fall into one of these 3 categories. We have what's called frictional unemployment. We have structural unemployment. And finally, we have cyclical unemployment. Now, you can probably guess from this name, cyclical, this has something to do with the business cycle. All right, something, we'll see what it is, but this is related directly to the business cycle. The others are not, and that's the key detail here. So frictional, well, you know what friction is. Okay, it's like without friction, we'd be, I guess, constantly slipping all over the place. Friction, in this case, is something that impedes the functioning of a market. So frictional unemployment refers to the people who are temporarily between jobs, and the key word there is temporary. Like the classic example of this is people who just graduated from college. You don't walk directly from your graduation ceremony into a new job that next Monday, do you? No, it does not work that way. Man, I had a student at another school, and he had an unbelievably rough time getting his first job. I don't really know what the problem was. He was very bright. He majored in finance. And in fact, while he was looking for work, he took the first 2 levels of the CFA exam just to prove that he knew what he was doing. But I guess he didn't interview very well, and it took him years to find that first finance job. And he told me that he literally, I think, what was it he said? He sent out something in the neighborhood of, 13, 14,000 resumes before he caught on someplace. So it can be rough, especially if the economy is really in tough shape. So in other words, if you're graduating this year, it might be a slow process to get that first job. But while you're actively looking, you would be considered by the government to be frictionally unemployed because it's assumed that this is only temporary. It's only a matter of time before you land that first job. And the other reason for doing this is because it's not the case that you can't find work because of the economy, although that might be the case. But your situation is very different from, let's say, somebody whose business closes because the economy is doing poorly. That's a different situation. Here, this is due just to the fact that it takes time to find a job once you graduate from college, or let's say that your company has closed down and now you're looking for another job. It takes time to find a new job. So this is what we mean by frictional unemployment. Structural is a case where we have people in here who are unemployed not because of the economy. They're not temporarily between work. These are people who have poor job skills, or else their skills have become obsolete. Like, for example, like if you work at McDonald's and they start replacing you with computers that can take orders, for example, that means you're becoming what's called structurally unemployed. Your job was eliminated because of technology, not because of the state of the economy. Or, imagine people who just never finished high school for some reason, or they don't speak English, or they don't have any training or anything like that. These all are considered to be structurally unemployed, and they're not likely to find a new job unless they go out and get more training of some kind. So there's a lot of people who could fall into this area, or maybe people who've been in trouble with the law. When they get out, they're going to have a tough time finding a job. They could be defined as structurally unemployed. Now, the one that you normally think about when you think about unemployment is cyclical unemployment, which is directly related to the state of the business cycle. Okay. So, of course, when the economy slows down, people start losing their jobs because of the economy. And we define that as cyclical unemployment. All right. Cyclical, meaning it is due to the business cycle. Now, we're going to see later on in the course, there'll be a lot of discussion about policy carried out by the government, which falls into two categories: fiscal and monetary policy. And those policies are designed to keep unemployment from getting too high. In other words, the government will explicitly try to, for example, cut the tax rate, or the Fed might try to raise the money supply in order to keep unemployment, cyclical unemployment, from getting too high. So this is one of the reasons why we see interest rates being reduced by the Fed, because they want to stimulate the economy and reduce cyclical unemployment. So we'll have this discussion again in later chapters, but the idea here is that policymakers in Washington are constantly trying to figure out ways to keep cyclical unemployment as low as possible. The other two, frictional and structural, do not respond to changes in policy. These are completely separate types of employment. But this one, the government may be able to do something about it. All right, it's possible that they can help stimulate the economy and reduce cyclical unemployment. So that's why they make a distinction between these three categories, so that the government can focus on minimizing what we call cyclical unemployment. All right. So because monetary and fiscal policy, which we'll study in great length later on in the course, can be used to help reduce cyclical unemployment, but not frictional or structural unemployment. Now, frictional unemployment could in principle be reduced if labor markets become more efficient. Like right now, a lot of jobs are found on the internet, which certainly is more efficient than 20 years ago, when people would pick up the phone and call companies to see if they had jobs. So I would imagine that frictional unemployment is shrinking as technology advances. Structural unemployment, the only thing you can do with that is to help these people get more skills. All right, they need more training, or they need something, because the way things stand right now, they're not going to find another job without some kind of help. Okay, so only cyclical unemployment can actually be affected by monetary and fiscal policy. That's why we want to separate these out and make a distinction between these three types. Frictional unemployment will always exist as long as labor markets are not perfectly efficient, but still there are ways we can make them more efficient, especially with technology. And then, of course, structural unemployment, like I said, can only be reduced with job training and other types of aid. Okay, now, we also have this concept of the natural rate of unemployment, and this is the rate that would exist if there was no cyclical unemployment. Whatever's left over then would be either structural or frictional. And so we're saying here that the reason why we call it the natural rate is because here we're assuming the economy is operating at what we will call full efficiency. No resources are being wasted. So the amount of employment that takes place at that point is defined as full employment, meaning everybody who wants a job, okay, well, of course, it means that there's nobody out of work because of the business cycle. That's what it means, all right? There's still some unemployment, but it's all structural and frictional. And so therefore, we've reached kind of like the maximum unemployment rate we can reach, or I should say the minimum, because we're at full employment. Now, the problem with this idea is that what economists define as the natural rate has changed over the years. In fact, when we were looking at our chart before at Fred, if you recall, I showed you that last year at this time, the unemployment rate was only 3.5%. Economists had been saying for years and decades even that the natural rate of unemployment was 5%. So what's going on here? How can that be if we're seeing 3.5% unemployment? So economists have to get back together again and say, you know, maybe we were wrong about that natural rate being 5%, because we're seeing clearly evidence that we could have unemployment that's much lower than 5%. So the so-called natural rate apparently changes over time, because, you know, the conventional wisdom was always for all those decades that 5% is about as low as we can get it. But all of a sudden, look what happened. Yeah, that was nice while it lasted. Okay, so I mean, but it makes sense when you think about it. Why shouldn't the natural rate fall over time? If technology gets better and improves, then we should become more productive, and then that would mean more people would need to be hired by companies because they can afford to do so. So I don't know. I don't think it's surprising, but I do think it's a little surprising that it was so much lower than what economists thought it could be. You know, for all those years that, oh no, it's 5%. That's it. It can't go below that. And yet there it was. But we're still, you know, in fact, you know, it might be interesting. Let's go to the internet and see if somebody's written about this. What is the current natural rate of unemployment? It has been remarkably stable. Well, you know what?
Could there have been special circumstances like high stock prices and low interest rates that allowed a lot of construction in other areas which can take unskilled labor, so that it was highly utilized beyond historical rates?
Oh, sure, absolutely. But see, the thing is, in the past, though, the conventional wisdom was that if the unemployment rate fell below the natural rate for any length of time, we should expect to see a lot of inflation. And that certainly did not happen. So this is why these people really have to start rethinking either what the natural rate is or what it really means. Because, you know, even here, let's see when this was written. Oh, but this is August of 17. This is before we got down to, you see what I mean? This is only a few years ago, and they're still talking about 4.5 to 5.5%. So if it hadn't been for the COVID, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if we can get back down to 3.5% and stay there, because once the COVID is gone, there's no reason why we shouldn't get back to where we were. But on the other hand, a lot of damage was done by the COVID. And so it might take a while before businesses recover enough to hire all these people back that they were employing previously. So it will be interesting to see what happens. But hopefully, with all the vaccines out there, we're kind of seeing the last of this stuff. And now it's just a question of rebuilding from all the damage that was done. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to see what happens in 2 or 3 years, what the unemployment rate looks like. And if it gets back down in that 3.5% range, then, you know, we've got to ask ourselves if maybe this is not correct any longer, that something has structurally changed, and that means the natural rate is lower than it was in the past.
Could it also be by, do they ever look at this by industry?
Sure, absolutely. It's not going to be the same across every, absolutely. It's different in every industry. This is the average for the entire economy. Yeah, there's going to be some industries where it could be lower than this. And there's going to be other industries where, well, it's going to be higher because it's not as efficient. You know, industries that don't benefit as much from high technology will probably still have slightly higher unemployment rates. And the ones that are directly impacted by technology will probably have the lower interest unemployment rates. Like, I guess, software, for example, I'm sure that will always be very low unemployment because obviously we need people to write code for all these wonderful products that we have these days. Like, look at all those apps on your phone. Somebody had to write those, didn't they? And the operating system that runs your phone, software engineers had to do that. And so anyway, but at the moment though, or so right now, I guess this article is a little outdated. Let's see if we can find more recent. Oh, now here's something written by Fred. See now, Fred, what's good about Fred, look at what they're saying here. They're forecasting it to be, they've still got it down at about 4.5%. But they're forecasting it to drop through up to 2030 down to 4.3. So they're acknowledging yeah, I guess we could find an article about this, but they're acknowledging that over time it does drop. And so I'm sure that technology has a lot to do with that. But these are basically forecasts down here, but still, it's interesting to see that Fred is saying, well, it looks like it'll continue to head down in the future. And I'm sure that technology is a large part of that. Oh, and the GDP that we reach, when we get to that natural rate of unemployment, GDP has reached what we call potential GDP, meaning this is the best we can do with the resources that we have. All right. It's kind of like an individual. If you never waste any of your time, there's some amount of work that you can get done. That would be like the ideal amount of work you can get done. But if you goof around and you waste time, you'll obviously end up with less. So what they're saying here is that if the economy hasn't reached full potential, then we define what's called the output gap to be the difference between what we're actually producing and what the potential is. Let's see, maybe Fred has the output gap. Maybe not. All right, that's okay, but that's the idea. So like right now we have an output gap because obviously the COVID has forced the economy off of full employment. And so the spread between what we could have been making and what is actually being made is referred to as the output gap. So that's output that is lost forever and we'll never get it back. And so that's why this is so important because it represents a lost output that we'll never be able to retrieve. Anyway, so just as a quick, simple example, if actual GDP is $14 trillion and potential is 15, then we have an output gap of $1 trillion, which implies there's going to be some cyclical unemployment. We don't know how much, but there will be some. All right. Now, when things are going very well, by the way, the output gap can actually be negative. It's possible that for very short periods of time, the economy can actually produce more than its potential. Imagine, like, for example, imagine that you work at a company that has a very strong seasonal component to its sales. Suppose you're working part-time in a retail store like Macy's. When are they most likely to ask you to work a lot of hours? What time of the year would they ask you, please work for us, not just your normal hours, but more hours than you normally do? What would you
Holiday
think?
season.
Holidays, yes.
Black
So during the
Friday.
holidays, the store is cranking to make as many sales as they can. The same thing can happen to the economy. We can get into a period where everybody's working like crazy, there's overtime galore, and the economy is actually producing more than its potential. Usually those cases don't last for very long. And unfortunately, they can also trigger an increase in inflation, but it's not impossible either. Okay, so it's like imagine the economy is one of those streaks where we're cranking out goods and services like crazy. People are working overtime and that kind of thing. The output gap in those cases can actually be negative. So there's a tendency of the economy to try to get as close as it can to the full employment or natural, where are we? The natural rate of unemployment, or think of it as full employment. But, outside factors can come along and throw us off, like the COVID, for example. But this is where the economy is attempting to gravitate. All right, now, what is it that influences the levels of full employment? All right, well, the age of the population, structural changes, real wages, and unemployment. Okay, so let's look at these one at a time. Now, clearly, the US is growing. The population, I don't think, is aging. Let me just check this out and see if Fred has it. Oh, they only have, well, they have 65 and up. I was thinking that maybe they could break it down and show us if the average age is changing. They both seem to be going up pretty quickly. Ooh. Well, how about this question? Is the US aging? Okay, I guess that's the best I can do. Oh, maybe this is it. The average age of the age distribution. Okay. Well, I mean, it's showing us the number of people in each category. One thing that's very encouraging, though, if you notice, the number of people 85 and up is getting bigger all the time. What does that cause? What's going on with that? Obviously, medicine is getting better. We're living longer. And same thing here. If you notice, the purple is people retired 65 and up. This is 20 to 64. And down here we have 0 to 19. It does appear that the average age might be rising because the proportion of retirees is growing and the proportion of people from 0 to 19 seems to be shrinking just a little, not much. But you do get certain countries in Western Europe, they're aging very, very rapidly because people are living longer, but also because a lot of people just aren't having a lot of children in those countries. So, yeah. But anyway, but why does that matter? Well, it affects the workforce, that's for sure, because older people are very productive, they have a lot of experience, and so employers will want to hire them. Younger people haven't had a chance yet to gain a lot of skills, and so they're less, let's say, their productivity is slightly lower. So the age of the population will definitely influence the level of employment in the economy. Structural change, of course, refers primarily to technology. Real wages, we'll have this discussion in the next chapter. Real simply means adjusted for inflation. And of course, unemployment, different types of unemployment. So, all right, anyway, that's enough of that. I think we've had enough fun with unemployment. I think the next topic will be a lot more interesting anyway, and that's inflation. Now, you might not think inflation would be such an interesting topic. It's one of those things that nobody really thinks about very much because, US inflation right now is really, really low. And it has been for quite a few years. No, I want the inflation rate. Does anyone want to take a hazard a guess what our inflation rate is at the moment? I think we would be better off with BLS for this one. Ooh, interactive charts. See, what they're trying to do here is show you. Now, the thing about inflation is that it can be very different from one category to the next. Like food apparently became very expensive Last year, energy became a lot cheaper, and this is everything else. So the overall inflation rate last year was 1.4%. Now, that raises an interesting question. Is that a lot of inflation? Well, it's hard to say because we have to have some standard for comparison. But in general, in the United States at least, and much of Western Europe, the ideal rate of inflation is considered to be about 2% per year. Okay, it's enough for the economy to grow, but yet not so fast that it wipes out our life savings either. So inflation is so low right now that people basically aren't even aware of it, really. When you stop and think about it, can you think of any products that you buy on a regular basis where the prices have noticeably gone up in recent years? I don't know. I'm drawing a blank too. It's possible that some things have gotten more expensive, but I'd say the majority of goods are either the same as they've been for the last 5 to 10 years, or they've even gotten cheaper. Again, a lot of that is due to technology. So inflation basically refers to a steady, persistent increase in prices over time. And so right now, our price level is very, very stable. And it's realistically been at that level for about, I'd say the last time inflation was really out of control was in the late 70s. Since then, it's been pretty stable ever since then. And a lot of that is due to the efforts of the Federal Reserve System, which we'll discuss in a later chapter. But right now, what we want to do is focus our attention on defining what exactly do we mean by inflation and how is it measured? All right. So this topic is extremely important, even when inflation is very low, because if things go wrong, our inflation rate could suddenly start rising again. In fact, a lot of people are worried that with all the spending coming from Washington, that sooner or later we're going to see ourselves with a lot more inflation. So this is a very topical area, even if our inflation is still quite low right now. So we're going to be introducing the topic of inflation. And the idea here is that it simply refers to a steady, persistent increase in prices. Now, as a consumer, are you happy when you see inflation in the economy?
No,
No, why not?
the value of the dollar goes down.
That's right. It costs you more to live. And we don't like that, do we? No, it's very annoying when prices go up. So right about now, they're not going up very much at all. But when it does happen, it's something you're going to notice and you're going to be very annoyed about because it's going to reduce the purchasing power of your dollars.
Isn't
So
it
the
hard to
BLS,
notice inflation when there's price volatility, though?
there can be that too, but they're trying to only look at long-term trends. In other words, they're trying to strip out temporary ups and downs and try to focus on long-term growth in prices. So yes, prices can be very volatile. In fact, this is the reason why when we looked at this chart, energy and food are typically split out separately because they change very dramatically over time. And then we can focus on everything else over here. And this type of inflation is often called core inflation because these are the areas that are not nearly as volatile as food and energy. So that's why they're treated separately because they are so volatile. And this way we can look at the overall trend of our inflation rate. But anyway, so we're going to see that the BLS produces a measure called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. This is the most widely watched measure of inflation because it refers directly to the cost of living for consumers. Now, it's an interesting idea. What they actually have to do is figure out what products we buy in a normal year. And so they create what they call a basket of goods, which they think is bought by what they call a typical urban family of four during a given year. Okay, so let's do this. Let's go back to the BLS and see if we can find a list of what products are in this basket. All right, so BLS, what goods are in the CPI basket? I'm sure they've got an article in there somewhere about this. Here it is. Oh, this is Investopedia. All right, well, we'll start there. The basket of goods includes food and beverages, housing, apparel, transportation, medical, recreational. Actually, I think we should go look at the table. I think it'll be much easier to follow it. Now let's go back to the BLS. All right, let's see where we can find how. Oh, here it is. How is the CPI market basket determined? Fantastic. All right. Oh, no, I wanted a chart. All right, let's see what we can do here. Okay, so we have CPI databases. This is the primary. This is what we mean by quote inflation. When you hear them talking about this in the media, this is what they're referring to. So let's take a look. I hope it's all listed there. Well, what do you know? Here it is. This is what they're doing. This is what they're counting in the CPI basket. And then they have the weights that tells you how important that is in the basket. So, wow, this is it's not as big as I thought. These are pretty broad categories, though. The number of items that are in the basket is quite large. But here we're getting the broad categories. For example, food, energy, and all the rest, which means if you look at it, commodities like apparel, new vehicles, used cars and trucks, medical care, alcoholic beverages, shelter, medical services, et cetera, et cetera. And over here, these are the weights. Notice how important is this relative to the overall index? So in other words, food counts as 14% of the overall CPI. Energy is about 6%. Apparel is about 2%. I'm guessing, well, we can probably look up the exact definition. It would have to either be the amount you spend on, let's say, a mortgage to buy a house, or else the rent you spend on an apartment. But I'm sure we can find the exact definition. How does the BLS measure housing costs? Here it is. So the census provide the numbers of renters and owner housing units in each segment, and the average rent of the renter units. The BLS estimated the average implicit rent of the owners of the units, enabling the CPI to calculate the total spending. In other words, what they're basically saying is that if you own a house, they're going to try to estimate how much you would have had to pay to rent that same house. So that's how they do it. Now, how they actually come up with that estimate, I don't know, but that's what they're trying to do. Ooh, wow, this is a very... Okay, well, oh my God. Maybe we don't need to know quite this much detail. This is how they're doing it. Ooh. Oh no, this is very complex stuff that they're doing. We're only getting the big picture stuff. Not only that, but they have to actually go out and gather up all this information. Oh, look at this. They've got all this good stuff in here. How do they figure out the cost of utilities? Look at this. They have a formula that includes all this stuff. Wow. This is not an easy job. I mean, if you were thinking about working for the BLS, you better be prepared to work hard. Oh my God, look at all this. But basically, yes, that's the basic logic. It's since the homeowners are clearly not paying rent, they have a methodology they use to come up with an estimated rent that you would pay if you were to rent that house, or how much you might charge to rent it to somebody else. And of course, if you live in an apartment, they'll just figure out how much your rent actually is. Okay, so yeah, it says here housing units are not in the basket because it's capital investment, not a consumer good. So that's why they use rent instead, because rent would be the return to a service. Okay, so that's their logic. They don't count the houses themselves because that belongs in a separate category. The CPI is only meant to measure consumer goods. And so rent could be defined as a service, so they can put it in here, but not the actual housing itself, because those are capital goods. So anyway, what else do we have in here? Food at home means not at restaurants, obviously, and these are all the categories like fruit and vegetables. Oh, food away from home obviously means restaurants. It's about 6% of the total. Energy. I'm surprised that energy is as low as it is. Motor fuel, gasoline, apparel. Let's see if we can find some really big numbers here. Shelter, 33. Yeah, that figures. Medical, not as much as I would have thought. Motor vehicles, transportation. So anyway, they put these together and they come up with these numbers. And so they publish the CPI number every month. And so let's see if we can go find the chart where they publish the CPI itself. So you can see what it looks like right now. And so CPI for all urban consumers, that's the one. All right, so it only goes back a few years. Let me, oh, all right, well, let me send it back. You'll see why in a second I'm doing this. To 1980. So somewhere in the 80s, the number, here it is set to 100. Now that's just meant to be a benchmark. It doesn't by itself tell us anything. So this way I know that when I look at, for example, the number of 261.562, that means that the market basket costs about 2.6 times what it did in August of 1983. Okay, so in other words, these numbers, it's just an index, okay? It's not an actual price. Oh, go ahead, Noah.
I wanted to mention there's an app you can go on your phone to calculate for American currency the inflation from any year to any other year. Like I can tell you the equivalent of $1.08. Like for example, in 1962, a dollar is the equivalent of $8.58 today.
Yes, you can do that from here, exactly.
I'm thinking there's an app for it if anyone's curious.
Oh, you have an app for
the
it? That's why
inflation
you're so
calculator.
fast at it. Oh, all right, why don't you tell them how to find that app? That might be fun. But let me show you, like, for example, let's compare 2 different years. Let's go from this year to last year. The CPI is currently, I'm going to put this on a separate document, and this is a quick and easy way to estimate the rate of inflation in the United States. So for 2021, January, we're at 261. You can put it in the chat room if you want to. The information about your app. It might be fun for people to have it. So what this is telling me is that the inflation rate between last year and this year, and this is, by the way, this is consumer inflation. There are other types of inflation we can encounter too, mainly that involve businesses, but for consumers, we're going to calculate the percentage difference between these two, which means you're taking the 2021 index minus the 2000. In fact, let me write this out separately. It's the 2021 index, or CPI, minus the 2020 CPI, all over the 2020 CPI. And so if you take out your calculator, you'll see that this is, let's see, uh, 0.014, it's 1.4%. Oh, somebody else already got it, good. All right, so very good job. Oh, there it is. Oh, that's cool. I guess I should have figured there'd be something like that available out there. So if you want, you can let the app do this for you. But so the idea here is that the CPI is an index of the price levels. So because CPI went up 1.4% compared to last year, that means the inflation rate over that period was 1.4%. And that's how, when you hear the words inflation in the media, this is what they're talking about, the percentage change in the CPI, because this is the one that directly affects us as consumers. All right. Now, this is not the only measure of inflation, and we're going to see a couple of others, but this is the one that's most widely watched. All right. So now, for example, when the Federal Reserve carries out monetary policy, they have a very close eye on these numbers. If they see any disturbing trends, for example, towards higher inflation, they may decide to raise rates again. In fact, I think they're meeting this week. Hold on one second. Let me just see what that produces. March the 3rd. Yeah, oh my God. So what that means is that tomorrow, usually these meetings last for 2 days, we're going to hear something from them about what they're planning on doing in the future. And that means stocks will probably go up a great deal or down a great deal, depending on what they have to say for themselves. But anyway, we'll have that discussion in a later chapter. But right now we're focused on inflation, and you can see it's still quite low. I did mention before that the Fed would like to keep it under a 2 or maybe a little under. So 1.4% is quite good. All right. Now, while we're talking about this, why don't we go see if there's a chart out there in the net somewhere where we can compare our inflation rate to other countries, just to get a sense. Okay, well. Oh no. Well, they've got some of the really outrageous ones. For example, Venezuela is currently at 9,986%. Oh my. That's kind of high, don't you think? How about this one? Zimbabwe, 676%. Sudan, 71.4%. Argentina, these are high rates. I mean, oh, here we go, the lowest ones. Oh boy, what happened there? Yeah, I'd really kind of like to have a nice little chart though. Oh, maybe this is it. Nah, I was hoping to table. Oh, here we go. All right, so yeah, this is this is all they've got. Wow. They've got Canada at 1.0, France is 0.6, Germany 1.0, Japan is negative 0.6. That means prices are actually dropping in Japan. And you might think that's a good thing, but we'll see later on why that's not a great thing at all. But so yeah, I guess our inflation rate right now compared to many of the Western European countries is about where it should be. But man, but some of those other countries, oh my God, absolutely unbelievable that a country could have inflation rates like 10,000%. But there they are. I mean, really. So we're going to find out how this happens, by the way, in some of our videos. How does a country get to their inflation rate to such ridiculously high levels? Usually there's a few common reasons for it. If you look at all these different episodes of high rates of inflation throughout history, you'll see that they typically have a very common cause. And that common cause is the government prints up too much money. And they just don't have any money to pay their bills, and they just print it. Israel is now, oh, that sounds pretty high. But that's going back to the 70s. It's probably more realistic to look at the last 10 years. But that does sound kind of high. All right. Well, anyway, so let's get back to the notes for a second. This is our CPI, and they have different subcategories. For example, CPIU only looks at urban households. CPIW is for urban households who derive half their income from clerical or wage occupations. So there's a lot of different definitions here, but anyway, so yeah, here, these are the categories for the market basket that we were looking for earlier. So basically, these are the broad categories: food and beverages, housing, by which we mean rent or implied rent, apparel, which is of course clothes, transportation, which is the cost of driving around or using the train or the bus, medical services, of course, and then, recreation, let's not forget that, education and communication. Those are the basic categories used by the BLS. And they're the ones who have to go out and find all these goods and actually price them. And so you can imagine this takes a very long time. And then, of course, they have to recalculate these weights every so often because these clearly do not stay the same over time. All right. There are different periods in time when people spend more money on medical services. The percentage that we spend on gasoline, for example, can change over time. So they not only have to calculate the prices of these goods, they have to come up with these weights. Wow. So that's a lot of work. But they do it. They crank out these numbers every single month. Now, you know what? I was hoping to show you at least one video today that helps tie a lot of this together. So let me see. All right, let's start with this one. Let's start with this first video, which is just a broad overview of what inflation means. So let me send that off to you right now. And let's take a look. All right, and so of course I will pause the sharing and then let's check it out.
Workers might be asking for more money and succeeding either because they've organized themselves well politically or because schools and colleges haven't been trained enough.
right, is everyone more or less done with that one?
Yeah.
Well, now obviously that was made in England, so he was using pounds to describe inflation, but it was quite interesting. I thought you might be surprised to see that discussion about the Hungarian inflation. That really puts it in perspective when they said that the money that it would take to buy a house on Monday would be enough to buy a jelly bean on Wednesday. Now that's a lot of inflation. And we're going to see more discussions about that in some of these other videos too. But there's another one right here that I want you to see, which should be fun too. And this one is about, it's called What Gives a Dollar Bill Its Value? All right, let's check this out. All right. right, are we done?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. We have time for one more. This is getting back to our discussion about hyperinflation. I think you'll find this very interesting. Oh, and shocking too, by the way.
For one, there's a lot of other people around you who would love to be you. So you're constantly one of them.
I'm Professor. Professor,
Yes.
I wanted to let you know I have one of those $100 trillion bills.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I have one of the $100 trillion bills.
Oh, you do.
Yeah, so technically I'm a trillionaire.
You are.
Wanted to mention
Well,
it.
yeah. No. Well, let's see what you can buy with it.
Yeah. Well, I guess
No,
once
that's
the
cool.
economy improves in Zimbabwe, maybe I can spend it. They probably are.
Well, most likely they probably have redefined the currency in the
Yeah,
meantime.
yeah, I think you're right. Probably they redefined it so you can't exchange it for like $1 trillion.
No,
Yeah.
I would. Yeah, that's usually what happens.
It'd be good for me if they did, but I don't think so. But it's valuable as a collectible.
I would imagine so. Yeah, absolutely. So hang on to that thing.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool, isn't it? All right. Well, anyway, so sorry. All right, are we all done with it?
Yeah.
All right. So how now that's pretty frightening to see something like that happening. But throughout history, whenever there's been a hyperinflation, that's exactly what was going on. It was always down to how much money was being printed. And so you can see, I mean, these countries, they think that this will be different this time, but it never quite works out that way. And so anyway, so let's see, it's 2:00 now. So I guess we'll stop right here. I've got a few other interesting videos here about inflation, not just hyperinflation, but inflation in general, which we'll be looking at. We want to understand how and why governments do this. And then we'll get back to our definition of the CPI. We'll see how it's constructed and, how to interpret it. So we'll save all that for Monday, of course, because it's, after all, Thursday afternoon. And so now, between now and then, I guess all you can really do is look at the slides if you want to review them. But we'll pick it up here where we left off on Monday then. All right?
Sounds good.
All right, see you then.
Have a great weekend.
All right, bye.
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 Watch.
Later.